for our next presentation, Kurt Rose is the natural resource specialist for the Paula Band of Mission Indians in California, and also has been their wildlife biologist for the past 9 years. He will be talking about threatened and endangered species on the Paula Band of Diegueno Indians of California. Please take it away, Kurt. Are you on mute?
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
I can. And
great. Sorry.
Can
and then my screen's visible and everything?
Well, I can see you. You haven't shared your screen yet that I can tell.
Ooh, it should be sharing. Let's see what's going on here.
Looks like maybe something's going on.
I was able to see your screen.
Okay, so it's visible?
Yes, now it is.
Perfect. All right, let's get into this. So yeah, so I work for the Paula Band of Mission Indians here in San Diego County. I should mention before I start, I'm not a tribal member, but I am a tribal employee. I've been working for the tribe for about 9 years, as my biography said, and it's been a fun run. It's been exciting here. So Paula Band of Mission Indians, if you're not familiar with where they are, the location, the Cupeño and Luceño tribes. It's about 14,000 acres of Southern California habitat, 34 miles of streams and drainages. Elevation goes from 300 to 2,000 feet, about 12 inches of rain in a good year, although if you're looking on this picture of the map, as you go to the top right, that'll be Palomar Mountain, which is kind of a famous landmark, beautiful place in Southern California. And that gets up to like 40 or 50 inches due to the mountainous habitat. But down in the valley, we get about 12 in an average year, sometimes less. This year, it's probably 6 or less. I'd have to look at the numbers. And it's inland Southern California, so we're not coastal. If you're familiar with Southern California, there's the 15 freeway that kind of goes from LA to San Diego. And we are to the east of that freeway, so that's definitely inland. And the San Luis Rey River is the big river down here. But as you can imagine, there's lots of varied habitats in the Southern California area where you get the mountains, you get these valleys, you get these riparian habitats, you get urbanization. So it's not easy managing for anything, especially endangered species in these varied habitats. Some of the things that are kind of issues for us, in Southern California, the tribal lands, the public lands, and then there's a handful of large private or nonprofit owners that maintain a lot of the good wildlife habitat. Everybody knows there's millions and millions of people in Southern California, and a lot of those people live in the cities, but there's a lot of urbanization, suburban environments, and the good habitat is really limited to some of these large landowners, of which tribes are one of them, so they have that undue burden. Important wildlife corridors and the habitats do not stop at the boundaries, so we have to really work on partnerships and building these networks to protect both the wildlife and the future of the people here. You can't just do it alone, no matter how much money or land you have. And I really need to emphasize before I get into my talk that other groups and organizations that are not tribal, but either have in the past work of tribes or work of other groups, they really need to step up and prove their good intentions and work with the tribes to manage a lot of these species, because we all know the history of how many nonprofits, private organizations, and federal government organizations have treated tribes, but they really need to step up and do the right thing and help the tribes, especially if this undue burden of all these protected endangered species on the lands. And then just to give you kind of an aerial that shows what we're talking about here, you can see mountains, you can see the urban environments kind of in that center. The left center is kind of where the town is for Paula. And then there's a lot of agriculture, but it's a lot of open, especially mountainous land out here. And the habitats vary from going left to right. We have on the left, that's Chocla, which is a sacred mountain. Gregory Mountain is the English name. And it is beautiful. It's just, unfortunately, like half of it burned, which I'll get into that in a bit, but beautiful, really good chaparral habitat. And then, the center, we have this yucca, which is kind of a telltale sign of really dry, often really xeric drainages. And to the right, we have what was, beautiful flowing creek after some rains out here. Generally, it doesn't look like that. The rivers and creeks, for the most part, except for those in the high elevations, are usually very dry. But during certain times of year, especially after a wet year, I think this was 2 years ago, this picture, you get a lot of flowing water, and then you get a lot of breeding habitat for some of our common and rare species. The habitats, are so varied out here. When you're managing, you have to plan for just tons and tons of habitats. We have oak woodlands, the coastal sage scrub, chaparral, riparian forest. Then there's some open water, thanks to some old gravel mining pits. Non-native grasslands, which are everywhere in California. Suburban yards, which could be habitat, and then agriculture. So the management is varied, and as you can guess, I'm the one wildlife biologist the tribe has. We have kind of one of everything out here, so it's not always the easiest duty to manage a lot of this. And then to give you more of an idea, if you're not familiar with San Diego, Southern California, or Paula, San Diego is a biodiversity hotspot for plants, birds, lots of other species, especially plants, but we do get a lot of birds. It's one of the top counties for bird watchers. I think something like 500 plus species in the county. So I've been here 9 years. And just since I've been here, we've had quite a few number of rare plants or new records for rare plants in the area found on tribal lands or just off tribal lands. 99 species of birds confirmed. Over eight of those are protected or concern rare species, which, not formally protected necessarily, but state listed or, declining. 14 species of mammal. A couple of them are pretty rare, but not necessarily full protection. 16 species of reptiles, 2 are fairly rare, and then 7 species of amphibians. 1's fully ESA protected, and then 1 is actually in consideration. The western spadefoot may or may not get protection. And then considerations when you're managing on any public land, especially this tribal land, when I'm doing endangered species or other species management. Endangered species kind of take top priority because there's a legal protection. Even though it's tribal land, we all know it's still federal laws applying here, so we have to consider these endangered species. But then there's only so much money, so you have to consider the non-native versus the native or versus invasives. Just because something's non-native doesn't mean it's necessarily negatively invasive, and vice versa. So what can we remove? What can we ignore? Where can we save money? What do we have to spend the money on? Working with tribes, you get the special consideration for species that are not necessarily formally protected, but culturally very important. So those kind of get a gold star, and we focus on them, like our golden eagles and bobcats and things. And then things that maybe have no protection, they might be kind of common, but keystone species are just really important things for wildlife. Especially our oak trees out here are vitally important. And I'll bring that up in a bit, but they're facing some major problems. And then, one of the ideas, especially Southern California and the Southwest, are we managing for the conditions now? Are we managing for the conditions before colonization, or are we managing for future conditions, planning for climate change? We have to think all of this, and especially where Paula is, even though it's what we consider rural Southern California, urbanization is spreading fast out from San Diego and LA, and it's butting right up against a lot of the reservations. So once we get to the endangered species, which is kind of the main focus of my talk, critical habitat, a lot of you are probably familiar, but for as far as I know, there might be a critical habitat legally on some tribal land somewhere, but if it's reservation proper, there's no designation of critical habitat. However, we still have to essentially treat it as critical habitat. It's just not that legal designation. So you can see from this map here, we have several species, purples like gnatcatcher, several of our riparian species, and kind of where critical habitat would be, either because it's kind of cut out and removed because it's butting up against the reservation, or some of it is still put on the reservation even though it's not managed as such. But you can see there's a lot of critical habitat that flows right through that central area where all our suburban environment is, where all the housing, homes, the school, the churches are. So it's a lot of work cut out for us out here. The first endangered species, kind of going down the list that is an issue out here is the arroyo toad, which I love them. You need the sandy open channels for breeding. They look almost exactly, act almost exactly like a western toad, except for diet and where they breed. Western toads, will breed kind of anywhere. A ditch, a puddle in the backyard, but arroyo toads need that flowing water and these sandy open channels. you want to avoid, construction and digging in the riverbeds, which for the most part you should be doing anyways, but also those river terraces where they might be estivating or looking for food. And we manage some of the areas, we make sure there's some open channels. If we're saying doing some invasive species removal or some habitat restoration, we're going to want to make sure some of it has that open sandy area and it's not just all thick riparian vegetation. And they really need that late spring into summer flows to breed, which is kind of why they're really getting hit hard. Is we just don't get those in Southern California anymore. It's so dry, and there's also a large dam on the San Luis Rey River, which kind of prevents a lot of those flows anyways. So the prolonged drought and the lack of above surface water is really hitting these guys. And then this is some of the work we've been doing is mapping our suitability and planning. If you see where that central kind of blue hash mark area is, that's our current and planned sort of habitat conservation area, which would be off limits for most construction activities, et cetera, to protect a lot of these species. But you can see low to high suitability, and all the red triangles are where arroyo toads have been found in the past. There's a couple outliers, which I wonder if people actually found an arroyo toad or they've been misidentified. But for the most part, it makes perfect sense where they're going to be found. As you go to the left, which is the west on the map, you get towards more of the quality riparian habitat where the flows maintain a little bit longer. So that's where you're going to find a cluster of them. Although, historically, one of the arroyo toads was found just in the casino parking lot. So they can kind of show up anywhere. You have to be on your toes. The next big species we manage for that, unlike arroyo toads, which most people have not seen unless you're looking for them. I've seen them, but I'm looking for them. A lot of people in California have probably seen coastal California gnatcatcher, especially if you've gone to the beach and some of the California beaches that have some really low scrubby vegetation around the parking lot. You've probably seen one popping up there. They love that really bad looking habitat along the coast. So they need that coastal sage scrub or chaparral. I usually associate them with the really low growing, knee height or lower, really bad habitats in a lot of these places. They seem to love it. There are several pairs around our raceway, and those are sort of, they're non-migratory. They do migrate somewhat, but for the most part, non-migratory. So the pairs kind of stay there. And then we just essentially protect the habitat that we know they're in and consider some potential revegetation projects. So on our map here, we mapped the possible gnatcatcher habitat, and those orange diamonds, little diamonds in the corner, are where they're going to be found historically. And that little blob in the center is the current Paula Raceway. So they found that habitat, which is all really quality sage scrub habitat, which is what they need around that raceway. And the raceway gets a lot of use, but the habitat around it is fairly well protected. So they love it. They're doing great out there. And I should note too that for the gnatcatcher for us, it's kind of the most inland population. If you could draw a line going north to south, kind of the edge of the raceway is about as far inland as they go. They're fairly coastal. They don't like the hot, dry. Least-Bell's-VIDEO is another one we manage for that is actively nesting on the reservation. They need riparian forest woodlands, sometimes kind of out of the riparian habitat, but they need the forest woodlands and riparian area. Generally, I would say, in my experience, this isn't set in stone, but they're usually near open or running water, or at least the good habitat that's left in California is near those open and running water areas, and that's why they're found there. You're gonna find them nesting in the willows and cottonwoods, oaks in some areas, but they really love willows, cottonwoods, and they also seem to love nesting in really dense thickets of poison oak and stinging nettle and other things you don't want to walk through. So it's not always fun looking for them in their nests. We manage for these guys. We remove a lot of the tamarisk salt cedars and some of our other invasives like arundo to kind of not necessarily actively planting, but to kind of manage to reduce their invasives so that willows and oaks and cottonwoods and things come back and grow strong. And then we do have some larger riparian restorations planned. We're looking at funding, but if we do some of these larger riparian corridor restorations, we'd be planting more trees and large shrubs that they would have more nesting habitat. And then, they're going to be found almost exactly where you'd imagine. So if you look at cut this map in half, to the left, to the west, towards which is like an open water area that kind of in that bottom left corner of the blue hash mark region. It's going to be really thick forested habitat, a lot of willows, lot of trees. A lot of it is, older growth. It lasts a while, it stays there. So a lot of the nesting birds are going to love that habitat. And it also is, just beautiful habitat, not as many invasives, and that's where they're going to be found nesting. They especially love to nest right around those open man-made old mining ponds that are full of water. Southwestern willow flycatcher is another one that we focus on when we're planning, but we have never found them nesting on Paula, which is not a shock. There are some no nesting sites east of Paula, kind of up towards the dam on the river, and some other areas in California, but they do stop over. We have seen them stop over almost like clockwork. Late May, there's a fence post. You can almost always find one, probably the same one, just hanging out, stopping over on a fence post by the riverbed. So those dots are where they've been seen. And, obviously this is, I should mention too, a lot of these dots are kind of user error because the cluster of those 4 dots is right behind the casino. So more people are going to find them behind the casino because people are there. So if people know how to identify birds, they might be reporting them. So some user error, but for the most part, that makes sense too, because it's that good forested habitat with some occasional flowing water. And then Western yellow-billed cuckoo is one that we consider for management, but the chances of us truly having Western yellow-billed cuckoo nesting here is pretty slim. They're getting really hit. They're really rare in California now, and we just don't have enough habitat. They really need large areas of forested habitat. They could technically still nest in that forested area, kind of to the southwest in the map, but I find it pretty unlikely. They really like really thick forests, older forests. Other species of concern that are not listed, but we do consider, our golden eagles. We do have a nesting pair, or I guess the female just passed, so she just died not too long ago. So they'll probably get another female back. But the pairs have been nesting on the Gregory Mountain for decades. Mountain lions and bobcats, which are culturally important and also important predators. We consider them in management options, and rare plants are another focus, especially some of the rare plants that might be of cultural significance. We have a lot of planning documents that all directly or somewhat pertain to endangered species management and species management in general. We have a habitat conservation plan, which is in, I guess, hopefully finalization or nearing finalization, which a lot of this materials I've been showing have come from. However, it's not finalized, but it is used in a lot of our planning. We have an invasive species management plan in progress, pest management plan, integrated natural resources management plan, which is going to house a lot of this, forest management plan. And then now we're working on a fire management plan and hopefully a burn plan to bring back some of these cultural burning practices and other burning practices to prevent large scale wildfire. And then there's a few other small management plans and documents we use. Our major threats out here to all the species are basically the same. Drought is the big one. It's also a threat to the tribe because Paula is entirely on groundwater, and that groundwater is rapidly declining in most of Southern California and the Southwest. And long-term drought is exacerbating it, as is the urbanization and the increase in factory farms. Urbanization in general is just kind of an issue. It's pushing a lot of the species onto the tribal land as they build new homes. There's a lot of new housing projects right along the highway just to the west of the reservation that could be hundreds and hundreds of homes that are now going to push species either into the river or onto tribal lands. So we have more management issues. Invasive species, there's always new ones, but the common ones, tamarisk, the non-native grasses are a big one for fire, mustards, and then fire ants are an issue, especially for arroyo toad, which are somewhat ant specialists, or at least like eating ants in a lot of their diet. Wildfire is a huge one, which I'll talk about in a second. And then the tree diseases are not directly impacting endangered species in the sense that we don't have endangered trees, but we're expecting to probably lose a lot of our oaks in the next 5-10 years because of gold-spotted oak borer, polyphagus shot-hole borer. Both of those take out oaks, and then polyphagus shot-hole borer can also take out cottonwoods, willows, and some other things. So we could see if both of these hit at the same time rapidly, we could see a lot of deforestation. So I mentioned wildfire a couple times, and I said I was going to talk about it. So in July, it's been about almost 60 days, I guess now, since the fire started, or 30 days. I don't know. I have to look at the map. I think it's 60. Chocla, the Sacred Mountain, had a pretty big fire that started off reservation. about 300 plus acres on the tribal lands burned. And you can see the result from these burns there. A lot of the original burn area, like the picture in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, is going to be the bottom flat area was mostly non-native grassland. So that's not as big of a deal. If that burns, it's a good opportunity for restoration. But once you hit that tree line up to the mountain, that was all beautiful habitat full of, rare species, endangered species, common species. Everything loved that habitat, and that burned really, really badly. A lot of the mountain is burned. So it's kind of an issue. Although I will say there's a sacred site, a Medicine Rock, which is a petroglyph site, really important site. And the fire luckily did not hit that. And it looks like the eagle nest is mostly okay. So the two big things are okay, but it is an opportunity. We're planning some restoration, but it is a major threat all the time in Southern California of fire taking out a lot of this stuff. We have been doing actively habitat restoration. Our first somewhat success story is a creek that's kind of right between our office and the cemetery. So those two red lines are where the habitat restoration is taking place. And I kind of picked this as like our first big restoration project because pretty much everybody who's a tribal member is at some point going to go to our admin building to the right there, or the ball fields, or the cemetery. Unfortunately, we have to use that too. So if we can get a lot of restoration along that creek, make it look really shaded and trees and healthy, and put some sages and stuff people are going to want to use. They park under there, see the trees, they see a couple signs saying, hey, we're actively restoring this habitat for these species. I think it will hopefully get us a lot of buy-in for some larger scale projects. We do a lot of public outreach just in general, endangered species and other species, which I cannot stress enough how important the public outreach is to get people's buy-in and get people to just know what's out there. Even though people, the stereotype a lot of times is that tribes are more in tune with the land. That is not the case for, Southern California, where a lot of people are urbanized in general. People just don't know what species are out there. So they're just kind of missing it. They don't even know basic rattlesnake safety, things that I feel like you need to know if you're living in an area like Pauley. You need to know, rattlesnake safety and mosquito safety and what species are out there and how to attract the positive ones to your yard. So a lot of outreach. We do a lot of social media outreach, which I kind of run our little social media branch of our environmental department, but wanted to make a point to also mention that social media outreach is a big thing now, and it helps us a lot with endangered species and other species management, getting the word out there, letting people know what we're doing, getting people's interest, what species are you not seeing, kind of that citizen science, and it works really well. And I think it's garnered a lot of support for some of the projects that, sometimes doing endangered species management, other species management means basically saying, hey, we shouldn't be building this there, or we shouldn't be doing this activity this time of year. And that can upset people. But if people are more actively understanding, hey, this is what the seasonal cycle is looking like in California, this is some of the changes from climate issues, urbanization, it might be a better idea to do this activity this time of year or build this in this location. A lot of this outreach just helps with our management goals. I'm also in a lot of groups and I deal with a lot of projects which are all kind of related to this. And I want to bring these up too, because you can't do it alone when you're the only wildlife biologist in an office and you're working on 14,000 acres. That's like a large public park, but there's only a couple of us doing a lot of this work. Now we have, thankfully we hired some field crew guys, but this is the first time we've actually had field crew. So the first time we have actually physically hired people to do a lot of the invasive removals and things, which is a big deal for us, but a lot of parks and stuff already have that installed for their large areas. Santa Ana to Palomar linkage, which is focusing on wildlife corridors, Climate Science Alliance, which is a great education group, Steelhead Coalition for those who like to fish. That's one of our, not technically endangered, but it's a species that we consider when we do a lot of water rights and water management issues. And some of the larger groups like the San Diego Management and Monitoring Program I'm involved with. Funding comes from a lot of areas. And I know a lot of people in here are probably thinking about funding. So I just threw these on here to say, ask around. And sometimes you have to massage endangered species stuff into some other ideas. But the usual suspects, BIA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but sometimes universities, small organizations, small nonprofits, the state, which sometimes is hard to do, but it happens. SDG&E, a lot of your utilities sometimes have funds to do things, even like planting trees. We planted some trees and we're hoping to plant more trees. A lot of those are restoration, and some of those are for the community and gardens, but more trees is better. And then Coca-Cola is a grant that I'll talk about in a second too. So I wanted to kind of finish up my talk here with something that it's endangered species adjacent, but I think is a really, really important part of what I'm doing here to get community support and outreach and community involvement for a lot of these projects is a community garden. We got some funds. I was not in charge of getting those funds, but I have been kind of spearheading a lot of the on the ground projects with some other folks in my office. They're old water percolation ponds next to our admin building that were non-native grasslands, completely not used by anything but some crows and ravens, about an acre. And now they're slowly becoming like a fruit and vegetable garden with a lot of native planting areas. We're planning to do an educational area, some children's gardens, some culturally important plantings, get some foods going for after school programs, older folks in the community, the elders. And you can see we've got some oak seedlings in there. And the goal is to really make that not only the community garden, but help that be part of our restoration projects in the future, but get that community buy-in, that community support. So when we're saying, hey, we need to protect these little brown birds nobody's seen, they kind of understand, okay, nature's all connected and we know what's going on here. And that kind of wanted to do a big summary of what we're going on. I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to focus on, but I feel like I do so much and I'm scattered all over like a lot of us that I wanted to kind of hit a lot of these points and just kind of go with it. There's my contact. Definitely check out our Instagram if you want to see Southern California wildlife and you don't live in Southern California, planet_Paula. So thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. That was very informative and interesting presentation. Does anyone have any questions? I know I've got a bunch of questions, but I don't want to hog it. So please, anyone else who might have a question. I can hear someone. Audio doesn't sound real good. Did you hear that, Kurt, or was I imagining that?
Oh, I didn't hear it on mine. Maybe it's somebody behind me that just came through.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't see any microphones open.
Okay. Hey, so Kurt,
yeah,
I'm going to start asking questions, but I don't want to hog it. So anyone else, please raise your hand or just jump in. But just a couple of facts about the band, just so that I'm clear. I thought I saw the word, I don't know if it's Diagueno or Digueno. Does that refer to the band? And then also 14,000 acres, is that tribal trust land?
Yeah, so, okay, it's two answers. So yeah, the Diagueno came up a couple times, but I believe that's like an error that showed up somewhere, because I think that refers to the Kumeyaay people. Like I said, I'm not tribal, so I could be making a mistake, but I know that comes up sometimes. But the actual people of Paula are, I'm not going to butcher the indigenous name, I don't know, but it's Cupeño and Museño. So the title of the tribe would be the Paula Band of Mission Indians, which goes, of course, back to the mission thing. But yeah, I think Diagueno showed up on a couple of different documents related to this and some other stuff, but I think that's a misnomer. But I don't know that well. I think that's referring to a different group.
Okay. And then is it trust land? Are you referring to there, or?
Yeah. So the 14,000 acres covers all the land, but a good chunk of that is trust land, in tribal trust. And then there's a few areas that are not yet, that would still fall under, state law for a lot of stuff. And then there's like some inholdings and things within the reservation, as most of these large reservations have. But the 14,000 acres is essentially roughly the number of acres that the tribe has in trust that they are, have to manage under tribal law, federal law.
Does anyone else have a question before I ask my next questions? And I know we're pushing up on the end, and I don't want to impinge on Katie's presentation, but I was just really curious about, you mentioned habitat conservation plan, and I'm wondering if that is an HCP under the Endangered Species Act, and then also if there's other concerns that the tribe or the band has, or are there concerns that the band has about any sort of Endangered Species Act restrictions?
Yeah, so two answers. Yes, so it is in constant revision. You know, there's a bit with the law changes, and then we've been requested to add some golden eagle wording in there for either potential listing or to, you know, protect ourselves. So it would be, hopefully in the next year or two, it'll be a HCP under, you know, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service approval and travel approval, but it's as of now, it's a planning document that mimics everything that would be an HCP, and then we'll hopefully get approval. And then as far as like concerns, there's nothing that is an immediate, like, we would have to stop doing what we're doing kind of concern, but there are several. I guess the big one for the tribe might be if eagles if the golden eagle, the California population or whatever they want to say of golden eagles are listed, would be a big concern for the tribe. Maybe not from a management standpoint, because we're already sort of protecting the area that they are mainly found in, but from, you know, the importance of the eagles, and not just culturally, but you know, the eagles nest on the mountain, the sacred mountain. It's kind of an important thing out here. And then there's a few small potential endangered species. We might have to change a little bit of what we're doing, mainly spadefoot toad and possibly monarchs if they end up listed, the western monarch population. So that's coming down the pipe, but there's always something new. Who knows what will happen tomorrow, you know, for these listings.
Yeah, well, speaking of the monarch, we're going to move on to our next presentation, but one more quick question for you. Do you know Eldon Brown, your Native American liaison, or should I put you in contact with him? Because I think you guys have a lot to talk about. I mean, there's lots of stuff going on with your band, and I think that it would really benefit you and also Eldon in his work for you guys to be connected.
Yeah, please do. I mean, I know the name, but I don't think I've actually worked directly with him. So put me in contact. Yes, please.
Okay, will do. All right.